Well, thank you, President John. So here's what I hear. I hear that the optimist sees the glass half full, and the pessimist sees the glass half empty. But the chemist sees the glass completely full, half in the liquid state and half in the vapor state. Think about it. The American Chemical Society has sponsored a project through the Society's Committee on Environmental Improvement that is in its third year of sending chemistry students to the annual United Nations Climate Conference. 4 college chemistry students were the official representatives of the American Chemical Society at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in Doha, Qatar, from November 26th to December 7th, 2012. And today, we'll hear from 2 of those students, as well as their faculty advisors from York College of Pennsylvania. We'll hear first today from Dr. Greg Foy, who is an associate professor and coordinator of chemistry at York College. Dr. Foy is a section counselor for the Southeastern Pennsylvania section of the American Chemical Society and Education Night Chair of the same. He and Dr. Keith Peterman have created a program sponsored by the American Chemical Society that has provided this unique opportunity for select students from around the United States to attend this United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Drs. Foy and Peterman, you may realize, share a climate change blog, The Global Hot Topic, which is hosted by the York Daily Record, Sunday News, and I'm sure many of you have read their essays and editorials. They're also regular contributors to the Huffington Post. Now, I've had the really distinct pleasure of getting to know both of these distinguished educators, and I respect them as a driving force behind a project funded by the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, which is investigating how to minimize the runoff of sediment and chemicals into the Cadorus Creek watershed, our source of supply. Dr. Keith Peterman will follow Dr. Foy, and he is a professor of chemistry at York College of Pennsylvania. Dr. Peterman is a member of the American Chemical Society Committee on Environmental Improvement. He served as a Fulbright Scholar in Germany and in Russia, a National Academy of Sciences Scholar in Poland, a research fellow at the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington, and as a visiting professor in both China and New Zealand. His current pedagogical activities, research, and writing focus on issues related to climate change and sustainability. Dr. Peterman is both scholar and educator, and he is passionate about sharing his educational and life experiences with his students, fellow faculty, and the community in which he lives. We're going to hear from 2 students today, 2 York College students. We'll start with Nikki Deluca, a junior at York College majoring in chemistry with a minor in sustainability and environmental studies. She started out as a meteorology and marine science double major at North Carolina, but then determined York College was a better fit for her. She's been one of York College's participants in research for that same study for the York Water Company in determining the effects of different species of trees and the effect of nitrate and phosphate concentrations in groundwater. And finally, we're going to hear from John Siller, a senior at York College. He is majoring in chemistry with a minor in mathematics. He's originally from Clinton, New Jersey, and he's always had a thirst for knowledge and is always interested in learning new things. He's currently studying the theoretical modeling of solvent effects on nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy. What the hell, John? I mean, seriously, you know, good Lord, I took chemistry and I only remember one thing in chemistry. What's the most important rule in chemistry? Don't lick the spoon. I'm pretty sure that's the only thing I remember. John absolutely has a love for science, and he says that his thirst for knowledge stems from his parents, from his mom, who's a math teacher, and his father, who's a chemist for ExxonMobil. Fellow Rotarians, ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Dr. Greg Foy to begin our program.
Okay, I'm not Foy, I'm Peterman. I'm going to give a very brief introduction. The star of the program today is for 2 students. I'm just going to take about 2 brief minutes to introduce the project, And this is an undergraduate climate science literacy project. The students you'll hear from shortly are Deluca and Siller. Next slide. The American Chemical Society is the largest scientific organization in the world with 160,000 members. We have a climate change policy statement with various actions. All previous policy statements had 3 actions, and you'll see them listed there. They are research dealing with the Earth and societal systems. The second is to try and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The third is trying to find ways to adapt to our global change. And just with this current policy statement, we realize that there's a lot of scientific literacy concerning climate change. So one of the actions in the current policy statement is climate change literacy and education. Next slide. One of the projects under the Climate Literacy and Education Program is to try to send students as official UN delegates to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And the aim of the UNFCCC is to prevent dangerous human interference with the climate system. There is an annual conference of parties, which is called a COP. And the purpose of the COP is it's the Supreme Body Convention with the highest decision-making authority, and that is where global treaties are developed. Next slide. This project actually grew out of the International Year of Chemistry. We sent our first students to COP 16 in 2010 in Cancun, Mexico. These are York College students, Anthony Domain and Leah Block. We then sent 2 students, along with 3 others from other universities, to COP 17 in Durban, South Africa last year. That is Kirsten Blake and Patrick Lestrange. And this past year, we sent 2 students from York College and 2 others to Doha, Qatar. And those are students, Deluca and Siller. So that's my brief introduction. Now, they'll tell you what they're up to.
Hi everyone, I'm Deluca.
And I'm John Siller.
Thanks for inviting me. So scientists have recognized that humans are influencing their environment for centuries. We've recognized this just through changes in our land. But by 1988, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, started to compile data that had to do with climate change, with humans' effects on our climate. And they issued their first report in 1990, basically outlining observations that human scientists had made and predicting what would happen in the future. And this 1990 report was the foundation for the UNFCCC, which we attended. And so the UNFCCC was established in 1992, which is the year I was born. So I'm 20 years old now, and we still don't have any binding agreements for really significant outcomes from this conference.
So as Dr. Peterman stated, the 2 of us, Nikki and I, as well as a graduate student from the University of Alabama, Parker McCreary, and an undergraduate student from Arabian College, Marlo Bianca, traveled across the world to Doha, Qatar, to see what was going on. So to set this up, there's a lot of data out there related to climate change, but the fundamental data set to any climate change study is the level of carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas, in the atmosphere. This graph, the Keeling Curve, shows the level of carbon dioxide observed since 1958 from the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii. The black line there is the average yearly amounts of carbon dioxide. And as you can see, it's on its way up. It's been steadily rising every year since it's been recorded. And we're approaching a point where we're going to be beyond any actions that would prevent this rise in carbon dioxide levels. And why it's so important is because as carbon dioxide levels increase in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas and it traps more energy and heat. And as the carbon dioxide level increases, we get to a warmer world, and we're increasing global temperatures to up to 2 degrees above 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels.
And so this slide just tells you a little bit about our natural greenhouse effect. When solar radiation comes through the atmosphere, the Earth absorbs some of that and radiates back into the atmosphere and into space. Carbon dioxide reflects that radiation back down to the Earth, and this is natural. This is what makes our planet sustainable for life. However, when we have increased levels of CO2, not as much radiation is able to go back into space, and therefore we get the warming effect, which is increasing, and that is hazardous to life on our planet.
And there are other greenhouse gases besides carbon dioxide. That is just the biggest one that people look at.
So this figure is from the IPCC's 2007 report, and it kind of just shows you how humans' influence is translated to climate science. The bottom graph, you can see, it shows natural variations. The black line is your observed temperature anomaly. That's what's actually going on. And all of your, the light blue lines, there are a bunch of squiggly lines. And those represent all different models from around the world predicting how natural variations, such as volcanoes, ocean oscillations, solar variations, would affect the temperature. And so the solid blue line shows the average of them. And we can see, just right from this data, how the actual temperature and the predicted natural variations don't explain one another. They don't correlate toward the last part of the 20th century. However, when the same modeling groups accounted for human influence on the environment, such as our industrial plants, our fuel sources, we can see that the average of those models, which is the thick red line, it matches up pretty well to the solid black line, which is the same model and is the observed temperature. So it's just a little bit of how we know that humans are affecting the environment.
In recent years, there's been a general misconception that scientists do not agree on climate change, that they argue about its causes and its effects. But this slide shows us that out of almost 14,000 peer-reviewed articles on the topic of climate change in just the last 20 years, only 24, less than 0.2%, were focused on non-anthropogenic or non-human causing climate change. So the vast majority of these articles in scientific papers have stated that there is definite human effect on our global temperatures.
And as many of us have heard, 2012 was one of the warmest years on record for the United States. And along with warmer years, scientists predict certain weather patterns, certain climate events to occur. And these are some that we saw in 2012. We had widespread drought throughout the U.S., a lot of agriculture and food prices we saw were affected. We had Superstorm Sandy in the Northeast, an unprecedented storm, still recovering from damage. And we also had an increase in the intensity of tornadoes. Just last week, Mississippi had a really intense tornado outbreak. They are still trying to calculate the damage, and this is really unusual for February.
All right, so that's enough science and background and data that I'm going to show you. Now we're going to focus on what we did. So over the past year, we had a lot of work to do. Before we even went to Qatar, before we even made our travel plans, we were planning for other things, planning for presentations. We made a trip down to Washington, D.C. to visit the American Chemical Society headquarters. We had a long day of training, and we took a writing class to learn how to better express our views and reach our audience in our blog. We then headed over to Capitol Hill and had an off-the-record meeting with a big-time policymaker in Congress. We went in November, it was before November, but it was around election season, so there was not a lot of people on the Hill, a lot lot of the politicians were all, but we did meet with some of them.
And also, throughout the last few months, months leading up to the COP, we had weekly meetings with our 2 mentors at York College. We would plan out our strategies for the website, for blogging, how to engage our peers. And then I took a trip down to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Climate Program Office in Silver Springs. I set this up because I'm actually interested in researching atmospheric chemistry. So I thought it would be a good experience, a good time to get my foot in the door and meet some people in that field. And I spoke to the International Program Manager, who also attends the COPs, and met with her at the COP, and we talked a little bit about what she was negotiating for the United States.
All right, and as the end of November, early December approached, we were making our final preparations after a 6-hour and a 7-hour flight, one to Germany, one to Doha. We found ourselves on the other side of the world in a completely different environment, completely different culture, and with lots of sights to see and meetings to attend.
So one of our major outreach strategies was our blog website, which is an example is on the right. Before we left for the COP, we tried to blog at least once a week, just giving scientific background, things in the news, just kind of translating our positions to peers that were reading. And then while we're at the COP, we blogged once or twice daily, different talks, lectures we had gone to, what we were hearing at the COP, what the atmosphere was like, really just trying to get our peers engaged and translate what we were seeing. Our website had over 7,000 views just during the 2 weeks we were there, more before and after. And we also had a lot of comments, York Daily Record features, so we really were successful in engaging in that way.
There are 2 basic sides to any conference of parties of the UNFCCC. There's the policymakers from around the world representing different countries. Those usually are members of the cabinet or ministers of the elected government. They meet behind closed doors and try to iron out policies and law-abiding contracts that the world must follow to reduce climate change and mitigate its effects. So that's the first part that's behind closed doors, and we weren't allowed in for security reasons, but we heard all about that through press releases and things like that. And then the second part of the COP, which is attended by thousands of people from around the world, is non-government organizations holding panels and discussions, talking about what's going on in the world of climate change, what's spreading the knowledge, the different technologies being used to battle climate change, and different policies. I learned a lot about the carbon taxes and carbon trading from different parts of the world. And it's very interesting seeing what's going on beyond our country.
And another way we shared this information was through webcast sessions that we held from Doha, from the actual convention center to York College. As you can see, they're pretty well attended. We had a lot of students show up to hear about the NGO side, the non-governmental organization side that John was talking about. And a lot of people asked questions, they seemed interested. A lot came for all 3 days, so that was another success for us in trying to increase climate literacy.
A big presence at this COP, as well as the past COPs, has been a youth presence, especially with this being in a Middle Eastern country. The Arabic youth had a dominant force at this meeting. While they're not directly represented in the discussions in the climate change panel or the climate change law-making policies, those meetings, they were able to make their presence heard and hold protests and actions and demands. The first day that we arrived in Doha, they had an organized rally around the bay in Qatar. And I heard it was only the second rally or protest that was allowed to be held in the state of Qatar, which is a very big government controlled by the monarchy over there.
And so the reason that youth are so vocal at to have to learn how to deal with a new type of world. Whereas our generation, our children's, your grandchildren's generations, we're going to have to figure out how to live with a really different world than we are used to. We need to figure out a way to make our lives comfortable as well.
So I'm going to take a couple of minutes just to wrap up our presentation. Our real focus was on these students, and I hope that you recognize that we've got some intelligent, enthusiastic, and very concerned individuals that attended this college. They've learned a lot, and this is kind of scratching the surface of what they were able to learn here today. What we know of the science, I think you can, from the slide that was shown, the pie chart, John and Nikki probably didn't emphasize that enough. 0.2% of the scientists that have published in peer-reviewed journals. And that went back to 1991. In 1991, there was a potential controversy over some of the scientific data. No more. We are on a trajectory right now for a 6-degree centigrade world by 2035. To put that into English perspective, that's 11 degrees. So let's turn up the heat in here, 11 degrees. And what's going to change? Clearly our comfort. But not only our comfort, but at 6 degrees, the world changes. In order for us to maintain a 2-degree trajectory, we have to act now. And the sooner we act, the more we're going to be able to do it. There was a recent article in Science magazine, probably the premier scientific journal in the world, in December that said, we've closed the door on 1.5 degrees. There's no chance that we're not going to rise 1.5 degrees from pre-industrial temperatures. How do we keep from rising above 2 degrees? Well, we act, and we act quickly. If we delay to 2017, it's a more difficult challenge. If we're able to do something by 2015, we're able to hold it a little better. If you look at that large blue at the bottom of this graph, that's current infrastructure. There's very little that we're going to be able to do about that. We need current infrastructure for us to continue manufacturing, continue our way of life. We do have to try to reduce that, but then we also have to peak by 2015 in order for this to be reasonable. So our next slide shows some of the impacts. As John and Nikki pointed out, we're starting to see them. As the President pointed out last night, sure, you can look at one individual event and you can say, wait a minute, that's not directly from global warming or climate change. But when you begin to see a trend like we're seeing, when you begin to see intensity of storms increasing, when you begin to see prolonged drought, when you begin to see flooding in areas that are not prone to flooding, that trend means what science is predicting is happening. So on the left side, that's a 1.5 degree world. We're already, all of those bullet points we already recognize. Glacier retreat is enormous. The world's corals, how significant is that to the population in the oceans? It is amazing, right, at the number of habitats that are destroyed when the world's corals are dying. Climate-related disease vectors. Malaria is on the rise. That's no shock. Temperatures are going up. 2 degrees, things get worse. We go on to the next slide, and we see a 3 degrees change. It just gets worse and worse. If we wait and don't act, and we get to a 3 degrees, it may be too late, it may be out of control. Okay? The predictions are that we're not confident in being able to predict what happens in a 3-degree world. 4 degrees, even worse. 5 degrees, heaven help us. That's why I think that Nikki and John are so concerned about this. 2035 is in their prime. It's past ours. And they're going to be feeling the effects if we don't act. So how are we continuing? I mean, this is about education. This is about climate literacy. We're trying to get this message out as scientists. And we're doing that among our organization, but we're also trying to reach out to the public. This is part of it, but one of the things that Keith mentioned in the beginning is we have the largest scientific organization in the world backing us, and we're presenting at these national meetings. And so our students go and they present at each of the national meetings, the spring national meetings. And so John, Nikki, and their colleague Parker are going to be presenting in New Orleans in about a month. So with that, our last slide has our contact information for you, and we would be happy to answer questions. We'd be happy to come talk to any groups that you might also want us to communicate with, and we're also quite happy to entertain some questions and try to answer them as best we can. Thank you. I'm not going to take long by myself. Here we go. Sure. So the question was, there was a report of some data that might have been made up. I think maybe you're referring to the emails in England that were obtained. Yeah, and from what I've read, that was commentary. I mean, those were questions going back and forth among scientists. It wasn't actually data. That had anything to do with it. Keith might have more to say on
it. It was stupid from a political point of view. And what we want to do is we're trying to differentiate between the politics and the science. They were in fact sending emails that any of us know you probably shouldn't send back and forth. Has the science been discredited? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. If you in fact get away from the politics, which is what that's about, that creates enormous numbers of editorials and so forth. There's lots of that out there. And you back to science, very simply stated, the science is not refuted. I mean, there's nothing in those emails that would refute science. It's clear. The science is robust. It's indisputable. That's what science is. It must be falsifiable. If it can't be falsifiable, it's not science. And they have not falsified. So until it's falsified, which it does not appear like that's what happened, the theory that global warming is occurring is a valid, robust theory. I would have to see a clear document that's not editorial based on that.
First of all, is this happening equally in multiple places versus some areas are more disturbed than others?
Okay, so the question is, are the impacts being felt around the world equally? No, because different impacts are going to have greater, or different effects are going to have greater impacts. If you're a small island nation, your country is disappearing. If you're the United States, your coastlines are being affected. So the effects depend, or it depends on where you are geographically and what your land is.
concerns with water and temperature. That's going to be, they're going to increase like sandstorms and weather events. And then at home in the United States, think about New York City with water like 10 feet higher. They're already above, or New Orleans with water 10 feet higher. They're going to have to build levees, going to have to build seawalls. It's going to take massive infrastructure, and it's going to happen. It's not disputed.
And talk about your second question on what scientists are doing to kind of curb this effect. As scientists, we're trying to educate. One of our goals in going to the conference, all the NGO presence there, is to kind of influence policymakers, just educate them what we know, what's going to happen, and that we need a solution. Scientists don't typically have a lot of say in the policy making, but we can talk to policymakers, we can educate them, and just require us to make science,
I'm going to follow up because what you have is a very, very, very important question. On, I think it's February 27th, I believe, there is the third annual National Climate Science Day in Capitol Hill. And every single major scientific organization, including the American Dental Society, the American Meteorological Society, and others, are meeting on Capitol Hill with the purpose of not to develop policy, but to inform our policymakers so that they understand the science of climate change such that they can make informed decisions. This is only the third. But why third? Because we very elated recognize that we can speak to ourselves behind closed doors, and we need to speak outward places like this because the science, people think it is, that there's something corrupt going on, and they're not. And it's every scientific organization, not one, it's every single one.
Well, since we're educators, we can't stop answering the question. I just wanted to add on to that there's a lot of collaboration going on among scientists and industry in terms of developing new alternative energy, developing more efficient energy uses. There's a tremendous amount that's going on in that arena. And one of the things that they didn't mention is that there was a tent at the COP off-site that highlighted a lot of those things.
First of all, I think it's terrific that participating in this type of activity because you're right. This is their generations, their kids that are facing. Now, I will just ask three questions.
completed, it's not highly publicized. So we're not aware of the developments they're making, of the progress they're trying to make. But it is out there, it's starting.
A big portion of the COP meeting was the NGO side of the panels and discussions. A lot of those focus on the technologies being implemented around the world. Carbon capture and storage, different renewable energy sources. There was talk about refrigerants. I'm not too sure on specific stuff. There's a lot going on. But there is hope that there's technologies, and the problem is they need to be affordable or they need to compete with current infrastructure. And that's where we're seeing a gap, because between government subsidies and just Americans being the way Americans are, it's tough to bridge that gap right now.
The carbon footprint you said was 320 parts per million, now it's 400, that's 25% increase. But we've also had a population that's increased by 100%. So we're not increasing the carbon footprint proportional to the population growth. Isn't that a good thing? Or could it be worse? Right? What's the correlation to that?
Well, sure. It could be a lot of this.
So I'm saying is that the carbon footprint is not growing at the same pace as the population.
Sure, there are a lot of metrics that can be used. The metric that we look at is the actual data that shows the increase and so when Keith was talking about science, we know how much energy a CO2 molecule absorbs. We know how much energy it emits. We can predict this. And so, you may be looking at this and saying, parts per million, what are you guys talking about? No, it's significant in terms of the impact it's having on temperature. So it kind of doesn't matter what your metric is. We have to reduce it. China right now is using a great metric that was actually developed by the Bush administration. If you show that your CO2 emission is going down as your GDP is growing, you're meeting your metric. But you're increasing CO2 worldwide. And so, sure, population is increasing at a higher rate, let's say, than the CO2 emission, but it really doesn't. We are becoming more efficient. There's no doubt about that. And we will continue to become more efficient over the years, but that's not enough for us to curb the rise of CO2. And that 450 mark that you saw on the slide, that's 2 degrees, and that's not far away.
What can York County businesses and York County consumers do to help with this problem over the next 2 years?
That's an awesome question, and I love that because there's a lot that you can do. First of all, it does take a substantial amount of money to send students to the conference. And, if you're looking at the presentation that they gave, I think what you recognize is that they're having an impact. And so one of the things you can do is help us support them. I think that we can all do our part. We can all do our part in environmentally trying to take better care of the earth. Recycling. My wife complains a lot about the thermostat in my house, and we cover up with blankets. Things that you can do to try to reduce your carbon footprint individually, and also what was mentioned by JT in the beginning. The project that we're working on is part of the York Water Company's goal to plant 1 million trees. Planting trees sequesters CO2. So There's a
What
lot.
about businesses specifically? What do they, you have a lot of business leaders in this room right now. This is a great opportunity, I think, to let them know what really happens.
Well, we need to maximize efficiency in green and carbon neutral technologies. We have to invest in those new technologies. Even if they're, see, the problem is a lot of businesses is driven by the dollar, and that's great. We're in America. The problem is a lot of these green technologies are not as profitable or is not as lucrative or incentive-wise to immediately jump towards a greener future. But we have to think about more than money for a little bit, because everyone can enjoy the money, but when our children's children and our future generations are not able to live or sustain a lifestyle that we've become accustomed to,